A few years ago, if you had asked me what makes a great designer, I would have given you a very different answer. I would have said things like you need to have strong visual skills, you need to have good design systems knowledge, you need to have a great portfolio. And while all of these things matter, I have realized that the best designers I've worked with think very differently. In fact, many of the beliefs I've had about design have turned out to be completely different. So in this video, I want to share 5 things that I used to believe about design and what has changed my mind now. Let's start with the biggest one. I used to think that designers were paid to solve problems. Then I realized that they are actually paid to find the right problems. Now today this sounds very obvious, but let me tell you what happens inside real teams. For example, let's say a metric has dropped, or a user has raised a complaint, or a stakeholder has raised a concern. Suddenly, everybody is jumping to find the solution. Now, everybody will say things like, you know what, let's redesign this, let's add a feature, or let's improve this flow. But one thing I've noticed about great designers consistently is that they don't spend a lot of time immediately designing things. They spend a lot of time trying to understand things. And this is common even outside the UI UX design industry. Let's take an example of home improvement industry. For years, companies tried to sell users very powerful drill machines. They kept on adding more features, more speed, more precision to their drills. But people were never buying drills because they just wanted drills. They wanted to build a hole on the wall. And the drill was simply a means to an end. And this insight became one of the foundation principles of the very popular framework called jobs to be done, which is people don't want products, they want progress. And the same principle also applies to UI UX design. When somebody is asking you for a dashboard, they might just be wanting more confidence. When somebody asks you for a notification feature, they might be asking for more reassurance. And that is why one of the most important questions that a good designer can ask today is, why does this problem exist in the first place? And asking this question is really important, not because your problem statement could be wrong, but sometimes the problem itself is wrong. And solving a wrong problem perfectly is still a failure for a designer. Once I understood this, I thought I had figured design out. I hadn't, because there was still a lot of other things that I was wrong. That brings me to point number 2. I used to think design was about making products, but then I realized design is about human behavior and how they make decisions. Think about Google Maps. Most people don't love Google Maps because it's really pretty or beautiful. In fact, most people don't even notice the interface. What they love is the precision and accuracy of Google Maps. It helps them answer things like, what route should I take? How long will it take me to reach my destination? Should I leave now? Is there a way that I can avoid traffic? Google Maps interface is useful because it helps people make these important decisions. And once I noticed this, I started seeing it everywhere. For example, Spotify helps you decide what to listen to. Netflix helps you decide what to watch. Amazon helps you decide what to buy, and Swiggy helps you decide what to eat. But here's the problem. A lot of design education focuses on helping you design better screens, while your users are spending their lives making decisions. And that is why the best of the best designers understand this one thing, and that is every screen exists so that users can take a decision. And the more clear the decision, the more valuable the product becomes. So the next time you're working on a screen, ask this to yourself. What decision is this screen helping the user make? And you would be surprised to notice how often that one question changes your design decisions. Then I noticed another pattern, and that pattern changed the way I approach research. Point number 3. I used to think more information created better experiences. But then I realized better experiences actually reduce uncertainty. Let's take an example of you tracking your food delivery. Have you ever noticed how often people are opening the Swiggy or Zomato app after they have placed an order? It's not because they're hungry. It's actually because they are uncertain. Where is my food? Has the restaurant accepted the order? Will my food arrive on time? The order tracking screen actually exists to answer all of these questions. In fact, in a lot of products, reducing uncertainty is a lot more important than adding new features and functionality. Take Uber for example. The ability for you to see a designer moving on an app is so much powerful. Why? Because it actually reduces your anxiety. Because before this feature came, people used to just wait for their cabs not knowing whether it would arrive. But now they could see real-time progress. And that is why Uber as a product became extremely effective. And this feature made Uber more trustworthy as a product. Not because they added this fancy feature, but because it reduced a user's important worry. So here is the lesson. The best designers learn to look beyond features and functionality. They learn to optimize for moments where the users are worried the most, and then they make it their job to help the user in the moments of worry, because that's where they need the help most. Now tell me, what do you think about Rapido's feature where they're telling the user how many autos have actually rejected their ride? Do you think it is designed to reduce user anxiety, or is it working in completely opposite direction? Anyways, moving on. Lesson number 4. I used to think great designers improve visuals. Well, I realized they improve systems. One of my favorite examples for this is Airbnb. When Airbnb was growing, trust was Airbnb's biggest challenge, because the guest did not know whether they could trust the host, and the host did not know whether they could trust the guest. And now imagine solving that problem through a screen. You can't, because trust is not created in a screen. It's created in a system. Review, rating, profile, photography, verification, messaging, policies. Every single part contributes to building trust. And that is why the best designers rarely look at a single screen. They zoom out and they look at the entire journey. They look at relationships. They look at user incentives. They also look at all the dependencies, because good outcomes are always created by better systems, not better screens. Now the last lesson that took me the longest to understand, and this has nothing to do with design tools. I used to think great designers created better solutions. Then I realized great designers actually create clarity. Think about the most valuable people you've worked with. They're not the loudest person in the room. They're also not the best presenters on the stage. In fact, they also may not be the most talented makers. But one conversation with them and you suddenly start feeling more clear. Problem is clear, the next steps are clear, the trade-offs are clear, and all the priorities are also clear. And this is not a coincidence. As products become larger and more complex, people who can create clarity become extremely valuable. The designers who become the most valuable are often the designers who can reduce confusion. Not because they have all the answers, but because they help people understand the situation better. And that is probably the biggest shift in my thinking. Because I used to think that design was more about creating. Now I have realized that design is more and more about understanding. Understanding people, understanding their behaviors, understanding systems, and understanding trade-offs. So if you're early in your design career, this is what I will leave you with. Learn visual design, learn prototyping, learn motion design. All of that is important. But don't just stop there. Start paying attention to the questions behind that work. Why does this problem exist? What is the decision that the user is trying to make? Where is the uncertainty? And then what is the system creating the core outcome? And lastly, what is it that everybody else is missing? Because over time, these questions will become more important than any screen that you would design. And from what I believe, this is what makes a designer truly irreplaceable.